I'm going to kick it off by setting a record, and I need your help with it. I need you to time me. And then I'm going to go through a scenario based on a little bit of a made-up company that is the synthesis of what we've been doing now for a couple of years at Avassa. And of course, the reason to do this is because I want to share some of the finer points of interaction that we have gone through with some enterprises that have really leaned in really hard on trying to make the entire organization happy with edge management. And that turns out to be a pretty interesting journey. And again, that's kind of the point of this presentation, is that I will share with you some of the observations that we're doing here. But I told you that we'll start off with a record. And I've been to enough edge presentations that I'm probably the most tired of every minute spent on defining what the cloud is. So I'm going to see if I can be the fastest vendor on stage for this event when I define what the edge is. I'll see if we can do this in less than 3 seconds. And I want all of you to hold the other vendors against the bar that I'm setting right now. You guys ready? The edge is few computers in many locations. Done. How about that? That's about as much as I think we should spend on defining the edge, because I'm sure most of you actually intuitively understand what edge computing actually means. Okay, so here's the scenario that I'm going to paint for you. And again, this is made up, but I picked a topic for this enterprise that I know most people on planet Earth understands, and that's a movie theater corporation. So we're going to follow this movie theater corporation as they embark on cloudifying their movie theaters. And we're going to talk to and listen to 2 of their employees as they deploy their first kind of applications across 100 locations, because they're a global brand, no less, and they have a nice popcorn bucket in their logo. And the reason why I'm doing this is that there's obviously a follow-up action here. This demo that I'm going to kind of talk around a little bit here is actually available in our booth, in booth 143. So for those of you who actually want to dive into the technical details, because I'm going to stay out of those for this presentation, please feel free to come over to booth 143, and I will show you the running code kind of behind this, this story here. And of course, every good story needs a protagonist. And in their case, we have 2. Here they are. They have weird names. Apologies for that, but I think you'll like it. On the left, we have Applifer Developers. She works in the application team. On the right, we have Patrick McEngine. He works in the platform or IT infrastructure team. And I want to be sure to tease these apart, because we see a lot of the potential success in edge projects is understanding the drivers, the wants and needs of these 2 teams and how they can be made to work together, which historically with the cloud, the centralized clouds and all that, has been a little bit of a tough sell. So I want you to understand Applifer as someone who does application lifecycle management and maybe a little bit of development. She cares for the computer programs. She cares a lot less, let's just say, about the actual computers or the infrastructure. She plans for, designs, and codes applications. And to be honest, in most enterprises, she is the most important person, because the code that she writes drives the application stream. So she is like the engine of the actual business. And she's very passionate about the application layer. Her counterpart here, or her buddy here, Patrick, he, on the other hand, is, of course, in charge of planning, designing, and configuring the infrastructure layer. So he would be someone we would call an IT person or an application team. His role in life, literally, is to be an enabler for Applifer and the other application teams in the organization. He is, on the other hand, super passionate about the infrastructure, and he wants to learn everything there is to learn about it. And he wants to do really well here. So Applifer drives the value stream. Patrick is her enabler. He wants to build the infrastructure for her. So what's happening now is that there's been an edge, of course, projects started. And it's driven by the fact that the company realizes that they have to provide valuable applications inside of the movie theaters. And this is a finer point, right? We rarely see edge projects getting kicked off by the IT team or the platform team. There's always an application or two or three, or the idea of future applications that drive the infrastructure investments. So in this case, Applifer approaches Platric and says, we need to run some applications at the edge. And how should we go about this, right? She has her own idea on how to do these things, right? She is mostly born and bred in the central clouds, so she has a whole lot of ideas on how to do that. Platric, on the other hand, he's a seasoned edge person. So he's very positive, but he's careful to also talk about what some of the things that are different with the edge as opposed to the centralized environments. So that's the first conversation between the two. And Platric brings out three things. And this we see all over the place in every project. Number one, deploying applications to the edge as opposed to the centralized clouds. Rarely, if ever, have I seen an environment where all applications are running in all locations at all times. So you are looking at some sort of targeted deployments, meaning that you have to have a system that allows you to describe under which circumstances or in which location a particular application should run, or a particular application replica should run. Because again, the big difference here is that small amounts of compute, many locations. So you have to be very specific about where your applications should run. Number two, it's enough with 10, maybe 20 locations, and remote management becomes absolutely key. I am still impressed by how many organizations I meet, not daily, but a couple of them actually on the show floor, that still literally send USB sticks. They still do. They reboot PCs on USB sticks. Obviously, Platrix wants to reinforce here that we have to have remote management. It needs to be actually automated. And the third thing that he brings out is that it is very rare to have edge-only applications, right? They're usually part of a bigger topology. They have components running in the centralized environment and then replicas or instances running at the edge. So you will see that application topologies that involves the edge actually is an extension of the cloud capabilities, which is, again, might sound nuanced, but it really comes down to then how to lifecycle, monitor, and observe applications if the constituent components are at least in two different types of environments. So this is what Platric wants to bring to the attention of Applifer, to say that you have to take this into consideration as you design the application and as you plan on managing this on the edge here. And as an example here, again, I'm just going to show you really brief an implementation example here, which is actually from the demo system, where we have 100 locations. And one of the kind of details here is that it's necessary to tease apart the definition of an application, which Jennifer is really good at already, and the formal definition of under which circumstances it should run. They should both be managed GitOps style, or at least integrated into the automation and the kind of CI/CD pipeline style operations that they already have in place. But this little part here, of course, is unique to the fact that it's the edge. So Jennifer needs to actually make place in her mind and in her tooling for that new kind of manifest, because it's edge specific. And another thing that Platric really wants her to understand is that monitoring applications at the edge is actually quite different from monitoring applications running in centralized clouds. The fact that you have maybe smaller applications, let's say 3, maybe 5 containers, but it's running in hundreds, if not thousands of locations, kind of by definitions calls for a redefinition of what's healthy. What does it actually mean that an application is healthy if it's running across 2,000 locations, where you have at least 5 locations are always offline, 3 of them unplanned offline, 2 of them are maybe ongoing maintenance? What's the top level KPI in order to be able to tell someone that this application actually is doing well? That's actually something you have to think of. You have to take a little particular care for. Application continuity is also something that is kind of specific for the edge, because it means that in many occasions our users have prolonged outages between the edge sites and whatever centralized resources you may have. And you'll be worried to hear that very few modern applications have that in mind when they're designed. You can, a litmus test that I always do is to check for what is the behavior of a particular application if you remove DNS, name service from it. Does it degrade gracefully, or does it actually just keel over and die, right? Because that will happen. And there's more to this. For example, how about sensitive data, like secrets management? How does that work if you're offline? The inability to reach, for example, container registries. How does that impact this thing? The logging and event streaming that most applications expect today. How does that work if the site is offline? How can we think about making applications more robust? And what are some of the requirements on the infrastructure to really make sure that we survive the best we can in an offline scenario? Because Patrick can tell her that there will be offline time. There will be downtime at the edge. It's kind of the physical nature of the thing. So, of course, a very common occasion that we have among our users is that applications are healthy, but maybe 2 out of 100 sites are actually disconnected from the internet. Now, how do you make sure that you actually have that as part of your operational culture, that maybe a disconnected site is not catastrophic, but more something to keep track of? And how do you keep track of which applications instances are actually running in these two locations, for example? Can be a very basic task, and you will be surprised to hear how many enterprises don't actually keep a detailed track of which applications are running where, so they can't do any even basic impact analysis if they lose a site or two for a couple of hours, because they simply don't know what's running in these sites. Observability, another huge topic. For those of us who have been in the market for a while, of course, we want to tease apart the ability to monitor the health of an application. And if something goes wrong, we need observability to drill into the root cause of the monitoring alarms, right? So it's a separate but vitally connected set of tools that allows application teams or application operations teams to research the root cause of applications misbehaving. And that, again, is super different from running, let's say, 2 Kubernetes clusters in a centralized cloud, or if you have 3 containers running across hundreds, if not thousands, of locations. So for one thing, you can't collect all logs and all observability outputs at all times. It simply won't scale, and it will overload all your systems because the sheer amount of data. But at the same time, you need insights in real time. You need to be able to drill into an application instance on a moment's notice and actually make sense of what comes out of that. And you need to be able to deep dive into distributed logs, meaning you have to collect logs from maybe a set of connected containers in this application and put that into a context that allows you to say something about the behavior on a system level. And of course, housekeeping, you have to be able to provide forensics of an incident. So record data, observability data, over some amount of time from a certain set of locations and keep that for future forensics. That's another set of things that Patrick really wants the operational part of Jennifer to remember, that it's a little different. You can't just keep all the logs in a data lake. You have to have a little more surgical precision, a little more understanding of what it means to have applications spread out over a number of locations. So that's going to impact what kind of tools we have in place for these kinds of applications. And here's another, just a screen dump showing that you have to probably have some sort of distributed query mechanism so that you can ask this system to say, show me the logs of this particular container instance in this particular location or locations, and let me see a replay of that from this point in time to maybe this point in time. And then offload or watch that. And then be able to, of course, stop that query so you don't continuously actually accumulate that amount of data, but you can do it when you need it in front of the people that really need to see that. Whoop. Next thing is that Patrick also wants Applifer and the rest of the team to understand that if Edge is going to be useful to this organization, it's going to have not one application team taking interest in running applications on them, but actually a set of application teams. And we already see users that have both internal application teams running on top of their edge computing, but also third party. They may ask their own vendors to manage the life cycle of certain applications running on their edge infrastructure. So what you need to be able to do as Platric is to make sure that you are the proverbial yes person to more than one application team. And that drives a whole slew of interesting features, including the ability for all these teams to bring their own tools. Maybe Applifer love the web UI, while Devin actually has a fully integrated and REST API-based continuous deployment using Argo CD, while Piper actually uses something like an Ansible or Terraform towards a command line interface. And the solution, of course, has to be shaped by the needs of the application teams, kind of tying back to what I started with, and be able to cater to parallel usage of its strengths and resources, so that Platric can just say, let's do it, to all the application teams that approach him. And we clearly see a big push towards this with several of our users going from on-prem applications running on specific hardware to a platform-like infrastructure with multi-tenancy and a multitude of different approaches to managing the life cycle of the application, but running on the same infrastructure. Of course, Platric wants to be the person that says, let's do this and onboard another team. So that kind of puts us close to the end here, and we want to kind of wrap up Platric's 5 pieces of advice to Applifer and the rest of the team. But before I head into this, I usually ask this question. So if Platric is the platform person and Applifer is the application person, who in here actually identifies as a platform or IT person? Raise your hands. That's a couple. Who here identifies as an Applifer? Cares more about the applications and just want a runtime to run it on? That's one. Interesting, interesting. I think since I'm going to ask this question over and over again to the events, I think we're going to head towards more of a 50-50 split as the kind of push to do this from the application teams becomes more prevalent, and that, I believe, is going to drive the shape of the solutions like here. Platric's 5 pieces. Application developers, platform engineers, please communicate. And I would even go as far to say, platform engineer, try to build a system that application teams not just stand or neutrally can take, but actually is shaped based on their needs, so they can be delighted by it or even love it. Number 2, we see a lot of users trying to, a little mindlessly I have to say, just apply what they're doing in the central cloud to the edge. And of course, that's a very human thing. But I will carefully point out that the edge is a little different. So some of the points that I'm making here, please take that into account as you plan this. And number 3, again, deploying applications to the edge takes a little more precision than just say, run this, right? Again, there's going to be constraint-based placement. There's going to be constraint-based monitoring and observability. And with that comes number 4. There will be downtime at the edge. I mean, that's just a statistical fact. And we should learn to live with it and actually calibrate what we mean by healthy application, calibrate what we mean by an outage based on that fact. And number 5, of course, towards the finale here, a platform approach unlocks the scale that we need for the edge, meaning that we should have an approach where you allow several applications, and with that several application teams share the edge infrastructure and allow them to bring the tools and the approaches that they have, and hopefully provide a solution that can cater to the variety of approaches that they're taking here. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. And again, as I told you, I'm not going to bore you too much with implementation details. For those of you who want to see this live, come say hi at the booth, 143, watch a demo, pick up some swag. And I just want to point out that this is a first pressing of a t-shirt that I think people will like. It says application teams and platform teams sitting in an edge tree. And let's just leave it at that, because that's where we want to go, hand in hand, arm in arm, in the same tree. Thank you, everybody.